You're getting very, very emotionally healthy. Very, very emotionally healthy. This is the power of combining coaching with hypnotherapy. Something today's guest on the DesuckifyWork Podcast does quite well. She also does a great job busting the myths and misconceptions around hypnosis. Spoiler alert, a waving watch is rarely involved. Michele Molitor is a coach, clinical hypnotherapist, and the author of the best-selling book, I Am Perfectly Flawsome: How Embracing Imperfection Makes Us Better. She is also a former creative director who was bullied out of her job, leading her to her current path. If you've spent more than a minute in the advertising and creative space, you know it's not always the most welcoming. We have a lot of work to do. Michele can help. She can help us disconnect from negative beliefs and rewire new neural pathways so we show up better for ourselves and those around us. She can help us deal with the elevated cortisol, burnout, and procrastination that comes with perfectionistic thinking, and learn to embrace the flaws and mistakes that ultimately make us stronger. We talk about how this is exemplified in the Japanese art of kintsugi. Check it out. It's really quite beautiful. She can also help companies, yes, even ad agencies, increase belonging, collaboration, and productivity with the help of a tool called Dignify. Michele brings a whole lot of dignity to our conversation. So let's take a listen. Okay, Michele Molitor, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Hey, TJ. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today.
I am excited to have you on the show. I think we're going to catch up on a lot of good stuff and talk about your book. We'll talk about the coaching work you do and hopefully just uncover some interesting stuff that people will love. Before we get into that, though, just a quick chance for you to tell everybody who you are, what you do for work, and how you came to be doing it.
Sure. So for the last 23 plus years, I've been a professional coach and added hypnotherapy into the mix, hence why people call me the mind detective, because I work with folks at a deeper subconscious level to get at the root causes of the bugs and blocks and the old emotional baggage that's stuck in their trunk, right? Got to get that junk out of their trunk and help
Yes.
them reset and rewire their thinking. And prior in my former life, I was a creative director and graphic designer in web development, and essentially got bullied out of my job in high tech.
That's frustrating.
Yeah. So it's what led me to coaching to figure out what to do next. And in the process of that, I was like, oh, this is the work I'm meant to be doing. So it was a blessing in disguise, but albeit a painful one at the time.
I'm quite sure, and I want to dive into that maybe a little bit, just because I don't think that's all that uncommon to get that kind of experience. Do you mind talking a little bit about that experience? And
No, it's fine. It took me years to even acknowledge it, and then it became a very cathartic thing to actually start talking about it and sharing and realizing that so many other people deal with toxic workplaces and bullying in the workplace and disrespectful coworkers and managers and leaders. And it happened to be, for me, it was two art directors I had hired for my team. And they made it abundantly clear they didn't like working for a woman, and did a variety of things to undermine me left, right, and center, in front of clients, behind my back, all sorts of things. It was really, really painful. And it created a massive case of imposter syndrome for me. Well, who am I and why am I here? And maybe I don't have what it takes to lead, and all the stuff that eventually was my undoing. And so in hindsight, it was a gift, but a painful one. And it's led me to this, life work of mine of helping people really reclaim their confidence after any kind of traumatic challenge they've gone through, whether it's in the workplace or with a relationship personal or professional.
Yeah.
And helping them refine themselves, their voice, and overcome and put aside the toxic perfectionism, the procrastination, the imposter syndrome, the anxiety and the self-doubt that really starts to fester from those kinds of experiences in life.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting to explore ways to move through that. I know that's a big focus of your work, and it's remarkable how I'm going to use this word, effective our workplaces are at bringing those kinds of emotions to the surface. There's just so much. I mean, in work that on the surface people would go, well, that doesn't sound like it should be a stressful job. Like being a graphic designer, being a creative director, being like, yeah, I get that there's some stress, but on some level, it's like you're doing work that should be kind of fun and collaborative. So like, why? So I'm curious, as you've done this work for 23 years, like what do you think is underneath it all? What is driving some of that toxic behavior that often shows up? It's like we may take part of it in ourselves. We may always want to kind of point and look at others, but sometimes we bring that unbeknownst to ourselves even.
Right,
so
right.
What's creating the conditions that allow that kind of behavior to show up?
Well, what I found through all my years of research, TJ, is that underlying that bad behavior are our own places of hurt and trauma and limiting beliefs that we carry around about ourselves, oftentimes formed when we were in childhood, right? Yeah. You might have had an overly critical parent or teacher. Maybe you were bullied by a sibling or other members in your neighborhood, right? Yeah. But those negative incidences impact us, and we don't. When we're children, our brains aren't fully formed until we're 26, so we don't have the capacity to process those more painful emotions, and then our amygdala, which is your fight, flight, or freeze mechanism in your limbic brain. I like to call her Amy. Amy loves you. She wants to keep you safe, right? That's her job. Yeah. That's her sole purpose in life. Yeah. And she makes decisions like, okay, that wasn't fun. That hurt. We don't want to do that again. So let's avoid those things. So we start to make up things about ourselves. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. I don't belong. I don't fit in because of oftentimes somewhat benign incidents or traumatic incidents. It goes from one end of the spectrum to the other. Yeah. And so we store all of those beliefs within us and our subconscious mind, which is 90% of your brain power, right? Yeah. And as we move into adulthood, we're doing things until one day we go, why do I keep doing that? That doesn't work for me. Yeah. Right. And then we seek out ways to create those shifts. And sometimes they're easy and sometimes they're deeply embedded. And you don't even know. It's like there's a thing on the end of your nose that you can't see. Until someone goes, hey, TJ, there's a thing on the end of your nose. Right. You should get that off of there.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, right? Sometimes you need to like I'm imagining back to your own experience, and this is maybe an optimistic view, but perhaps at some point, one of those people who was bullying you and probably bullying others, because that's how that usually works, perhaps they had an experience at some point where somebody finally pointed at that thing on their nose and they go like, that's not helping anyone. That doesn't always happen, obviously, but like sometimes you wonder, like, if somebody's basically acting out something that got planted when they were 7 or whatever, that they maybe just, there's blinders on that they don't even really realize just how much they're impacting others with their behavior until somebody finally either brings it up or some kind of blow
shakes
up.
Their tree, right? Yeah. I call them fear blinders, right? Yeah. And Amy puts those into place. Yeah. Don't look over there. It's not safe. Don't do that. That's not safe. Yeah. And so they're trauma responses to life's difficulties. in
Mm-hmm.
whatever shape or form that is. And so your brain is going, okay, you got to stay on the straight and narrow, right? You got to do everything perfect so that you'll be loved or you'll belong or you'll fit in, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I just work a little harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you a great example. I had a client who came to me with severe anxiety and IBS, inflammatory bowel syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd been dealing with this chronic issue for 15 years. And so through our work together, what we got at was the root causes of it, where um, she realized in high school, she was the star basketball player. Her dad was her coach. And
Okay.
no matter how well she played, on the drive home, he would berate her. I can't believe you played like crap. You missed that shot. You should have done, you could have done, da, 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 da. So,
Mm-hmm.
in response to that criticism, she became a people pleaser and a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
Everything had to be just right, which created the nervous, anxious response of IBS,
Mm-hmm.
which plagued her until she came to me to the point where she was almost homebound.
Yeah.
She was afraid to go too far from the house because she
Mm-hmm.
couldn't trust her body,
Yeah.
right?
Well.
And so over 90 days of working with her, we were able to get at those root causes. She was
Mm.
able to go, I'm 30 years old now. My dad's
Right.
not telling me what I can and can't do. And we
Mm-hmm.
turned it off. Her IBS stopped. She
Mm.
was able to calm her nervous system by resetting her thinking and then move out and then grow her business in ways that she never even thought possible.
Wow. So 90 days to do that. I mean, it sounds sort of borderline miraculous to me to be able to have that impact. So what do you do to help people have that kind of a transformation in that short period of time?
Yeah, well, it is really amazing. So it's a combination of coaching and hypnotherapy.
Okay.
The coaching is a way to work with your conscious mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the hypnotherapy allows us to work with a deeper subconscious level where those
Okay.
root causes are, those
Mm.
beliefs, where they got planted in the first place, so that then we can look back at those moments in life through adult eyes and go, well, I'm not in that place anymore. I'm not that little kid anymore. I'm
Mm-hmm.
safe. I'm
Yeah.
safe. And so
Mm.
part of what comes out of the hypnotherapy sessions and all the conversations I have is I create these custom recordings, TJ, that are blended with binaural music to entrain your brain, to
Mm.
take you into a deeply relaxing alpha or theta brainwave state, which is your
Okay.
super learning state.
Mm-hmm.
And you listen to those every night as you go to sleep. They're
Hmm.
intended to have you go to sleep. So your brain does all the heavy lifting for you.
Okay.
Because just like listening to a song on the radio from 30 years ago, you
Mm-hmm.
still remember the words, right?
Yeah.
Because
Mm-hmm.
the repetition of that. So the
Mm-hmm.
repetition of listening to this calming voice and these new ideas and beliefs, they're imprinting new neural pathways in your brain.
Mm.
So you start to literally show up more confident, more at ease, more calm. So your cortisol levels drop, your adrenals calm down, and your body reacts to your mind,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So I've had folks who've been able to dial down or completely shut off IBS, chronic migraines, fibromyalgia, psoriasis,
Mm.
um, eating disorders.
Yeah.
I had one gal in 30 days, she turned off a 40-year sugar binge eating habit.
Wow.
Yeah.
So hypnosis has this kind of history through television and movies that makes it sound very like,
Yes, look at no,
scary,
there's no
blah.
watches involved. There's no spinning teacups.
So
No.
like if I as I hear you, first of all, you described the anxiety with the IBS, and I thought, well, coming from the world of advertising, that describes probably more than half the people that I worked with. It just seems to be almost a norm, and I'm sure that's true certainly in businesses like tech and some of these other places where it's just there's just so much pressure that we internalize, and then based on what I'm hearing you saying, we kind of layer it on top of our own stuff and basically play out the fears of that were imprinted when we were young, and we just kind of keep repeating and repeating, and I'm not worthy, or whatever the thing is that shows up.
Exactly.
So what is hypnosis? We don't necessarily need to like go deep in it, but I'm just like, for people who never experienced it, what can they expect from the experience?
Sure. So, you know the feeling when you first wake up from a good nap on the couch? You knock out for like an hour and you wake up and you're like, that was good. Like your whole body's really relaxed and your brain's just starting to come online. That's the relaxed place that I take people to.
Okay.
It's an alpha brainwave state. It's below beta, which is our conscious thinking place.
Got it.
And in that place, your subconscious mind is more open and receptive to learning. So you can be sitting at your desk, you could be on your bed, sitting up on your couch, not lying down because I don't want anybody to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Although I'm very relaxing. And in that state, I'm able to talk with them. They're very relaxed. They can hear my voice. They can answer my questions. Except I'm talking with that deeper part of them to get at the memories that bubble up to the surface with my questions of, so when was the first time you experienced this feeling? Right? So a great example is a client who came to me with severe cat allergies and was getting in the way of his dating life.
Oh, wow.
Right? Yeah. And through our session, he realized, so he had a really close relationship with his dad when he was little. And then about the time that his dad got a new job and was less available to him, they got a new cat. And so his little 6-year-old mind associated the cat with my dad not being available. So his amygdala went, oh, that's bad, and made him allergic to it.
Wow.
So once we connected those dots and he was able to see that and disconnect those things, his cat allergies went away.
That's amazing.
Like, yes, wow. I love that.
That's very cool. And it's the whole like dating thing. That's interesting. So like, I'm a cat person, but I'm a cat person because of my wife. So when I met my wife, she had a cat, and at the time I was like, about cats. I wasn't
they grow
allergic,
on you, don't they? And then you get all of them. You got them.
Now I'm like a giant cat fan. I've got a cat on my shirt. I'm like,
nice. I got 3 out there.
But I love, like, I think the underlying thing, one, when you describe what hypnosis is, it certainly doesn't sound scary or weird like people's brains might think of it. But my brain even went to like, I don't know if this is true, but when you're falling asleep, do you enter that same state sometimes where you're kind of drifting? Because like, I think like sometimes when I was working, full time in the advertising world, sometimes I have this idea as I'm falling asleep, and I want to remember that, and usually forget it because you fall asleep. But it's like that space is like fertile ground for interesting thoughts. Is that the same? Like, is that what are you drifting into?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have a Fitbit?
I've got my Apple Watch.
Okay, right. So if you look at your sleep stages, right, it'll say you were awake, you had light sleep, you had REM sleep, you had deep sleep, right? So deep sleep is delta. Okay. REM sleep is theta. Light sleep is alpha.
Okay.
Those are different brainwave states that you're in as you're going down into those deeper levels. So I'm taking people into that semi-conscious state. And so they're always in control, right? They're never, people think, oh, I'm going to get stuck there. No, you're never going to get stuck there, right? Okay. You might fall asleep. Yeah. But, it's just a really relaxing place that allows you to access that 90% of your subconscious mind that you can't access when you're fully conscious, which is why hypnotherapy can be so much more powerful than regular coaching and regular talk therapy. They all have their benefits, right? I've done all of them, and they all have their benefits. And when you're able to get at the root causes and disconnect yourself, think of it as we have these negative energy cords that are attached, embedded in our body to either an event or a person somewhere in our life that keeps us stuck in that pattern. So in this process, we disconnect them. And then we make new connections. We make new choices and conscious decisions about how you want to move forward powerfully. And then the coaching then allows us to go, okay, now that we've taken off the fear blinders, what are the goals and strategies to put into place now from this place? So people are able to make these really big quantum leaps in their life, not only with their confidence and their self-assuredness, but they're also able to heal and calm their nervous system and their bodies along the way.
Wow. So when you talk about coaching, I do coaching, executive coaching and leadership coaching. Like if somebody shows up to talk to you, do you have to kind of break down some skepticism about any of this stuff? I mean, I'm picturing like a CEO, type A, fast paced, comes in. It's like, I want coaching. I just want to have my goals, work through them. Like what opens their eyes to the possibility of hypnosis really doing all this stuff you talk about? How do they see it before experiencing?
Sure. Well, this is why I do so many podcasts. I've been on over 200 podcast interviews.
Awesome. Yeah.
And it's about educating people about the amazing benefits of it. And I don't know about you, but as a creative, I'm like better, smarter, faster. How can I get from point A to point B faster, more effectively? Yeah. So when I explain it to them, like, well, you can take 12 months or more to achieve this, or you can do it in 30 to 90 days. You choose.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, that's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah,
and so our sessions are typically on a kind of a weekly cadence, give or take, right? And we toggle between coaching and hypnotherapy. Typically, there's one hypnotherapy session a month, and it might stretch out over 3 to 6 months, just depending on the timing of things.
Okay.
But I also give homework. So you're going to have your custom recordings to listen to over 30 days.
Okay.
You get one, and then we do another session, and then you get a new one. You start listening to that, so on. But I might ask clients to do other things, like work on somatic breathing practices, right? Or mindfulness practices, because I'm all about a holistic process, right? Because we don't just operate from here. We have this whole amazing body to utilize. So getting people into their bodies, feeling their feelings. And I know that sounds scary for some people. I used to be that way, right? But just noticing the sensations, right? You know how sometimes your fingers or your toes get all tingly?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, well, that's just a sensation. So our feelings are just a sensation. It's just energy that needs to move.
Yeah.
And so giving people the tools and the understanding of how to move that energy that's been stuck in their nervous system for sometimes decades, and moving it out and then replacing it with spaciousness and lightness of being and more joy and ways of seeing the world.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept, because I think for a lot of folks, and I'd put myself in this space, there's definitely like a little bit of a disconnect with the body. Sometimes it's like all of a sudden you become aware of it and you're like, oh, that's weird. Like I'm very aware of the feelings in my body. And other times it's like we're trained to just live up here, and resist any weird sensations in the body, ignore them, try to work through them,
Stuff them. I don't feel that back pain. La 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 la.
Exactly.
Until your body goes, I'm gonna get your attention and you're gonna listen to me now. And then you're like, oh, my back seized up and I can't move, and oh crap, right? And I've had that happen too. So because I used to do that, right? Until on Thanksgiving Day 10 years ago, my back went nope. And I went through 3 rounds of cortisol shots to my spine, and it laughed at me like,
Oh, geez.
no, that's really not the problem. You're not paying attention. And sadly, I had a very dear friend of mine pass away unexpectedly. And when we had the celebration of life for her, we had my girlfriends and I had put the whole thing together, and there was hundreds of people there, and all I could do was sit there and cry and sob, like 3 hours. And I realized in hindsight that it had given me permission to allow all of this other emotions that I had never truly expressed from very painful events in my life.
Yeah.
And it just allowed it out. And within a few short weeks, my back pain went away.
Wow. Is that what started you thinking about doing the hypnotherapy and that kind of work, or how did you get into that space?
Yeah, no, that was just a massive aha moment. Like, look how powerful my body is and how much that stored emotion was impacting me. So that was a big, big light bulb moment. And then roll forward to 2016, and I discovered the work of a world-renowned hypnotherapist named Marissa Peer and her methodology called rapid transformational therapy. And I was like, oh, I'm curious. I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always like, can I have another workshop, please? Right?
Yes.
And so I tried it on and checked it out, and it created some massive shifts for me in weeks. I was like, okay, you have my attention.
Yeah.
So she had just started training people in her methodology. And so I, of course, raised my hand and got certified in the beginning of 2017, and very quickly saw how combining coaching and hypnotherapy together is like supercharging each other.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think, I think about first, I think who you probably work with. It sounds like you work with, executives and leaders and all that kind of stuff, as well as some others. And we talked earlier about some of the general just tough stuff that people are dealing with at work, the stress, the anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Toxic behavior that you experience, that probably almost all of us somewhere have experienced or been a part of. And then I think, one of the things that I know you talk about is this idea of dignity in the workplace. And I think, sort of the opposite of what we're talking about, the toxic behavior and sort of I think about some of the behaviors that we've seen in recent years around, kind of rushing people back into the office and the forced, like mandating that and all that kind of stuff, and just not treating people as full human beings, but more as just sort of pieces of a machine and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I love that you focus on that. And part of the thing I wonder, like, did we ever have dignity in the workplace? And if so, like, what does it look like to have dignity in the workplace?
Sure. So dignity is essentially treating somebody with honor and respect, right? And at a fundamental human level, we all want to feel seen, heard, and respected for the contributions that we bring to the table, right? I haven't found a human yet who doesn't want that.
Yeah.
Except we tend to forget about that. We give attaboys from time to time, but really when I found that when you understand your dignity traits, in other words, what are your core values that have you feel dignified, that leave you feeling seen and heard, when you can understand that about yourself and you can understand that about your coworkers. And this isn't to say it's a touchy-feely, smushy thing. It's not. It's just, what are those values that are really important to you? How do you want to be treated, and how don't you want to be treated?
Yeah.
I've never found a tool that has ever asked that question before. When I discovered Dignify, which is this very powerful tool that I use with clients,
Mm-hmm.
It allows someone to identify their top 5 dignity traits.
Mm.
What are their motivational drivers in
Mm-hmm.
a quantifiable way?
Mm-hmm.
And what are their do's and don'ts?
Yeah.
I mean, have any boss you've ever worked for other than yourself ever asked you, how do you or don't you want to be treated, TJ?
No, I mean it's sort of remarkable when you say it because on some level it seems sort of very foundational, but I think we just don't have the language for it. It's just never really been brought up or trained in any way, so
Yes.
that we end up just kind of fishing for it a little bit. We sort of try to guess either based on our own experience and our own beliefs, or we interpret behavior from somebody and go, I think they like this. But to actually talk about it, it almost feels weird in a way, like because it's so not common to do.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. And so my colleague Joe Kittinger, in an effort to figure out how to speak to his stepson more
Mm,
effectively, because they're so different, he
yeah.
created this. He invented this. It's actually a patented survey. It's not an
Hmm.
assessment tool
Okay.
because it's looking at your emotional motivators,
Okay.
and it identifies those values, those motivators, but also how you move through the world with
Mm,
greatest ease.
mm,
So we liken it to, what country do you live in? There's peace country, there's fun country,
hmm.
there's control country, and
Uh,
perfect country, which is my personal favorite,
okay.
right? Hence why I wrote a book on overcoming perfectionism.
Yes.
Right. And so when you understand who are your people and who are
Mhm,
not your people, you can start to learn how to communicate and bridge those different languages, if you will,
mhm. Yeah.
because they want different things.
Hmm.
Right. Control country, for example, they want to get stuff done.
Hmm.
Right. Whereas peace country, they want everybody to get along, and
Hmm.
they're low conflict, and they
Yeah.
just want to figure it all out. Right.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
by understanding this about each of the people on your team,
Hmm.
how do you think that might impact productivity and
Hmm.
collaboration?
Yeah. I mean, it has to help because we're not doing a good job of those things generally. Like even as you describe those types of people, part of me goes, yeah, I know those types of people. But even sort of being aware of that at like a subsurface level, it rarely seems to impact behavior. It's more like you're frustrated, right? Like, why is that person always trying to control everything? Why does that person just have this sort of like,
Why does it always have to be so like this, right?
yeah.
And that's the other thing, and the point you made earlier is that we might recognize that in someone,
Mhm.
but yet at the end of the day, humans, and this is just natural, we tend to think, well, doesn't everybody see the world like I see the world? It all looks
Mhm.
like this, right?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And so learning how to step into the shoes of other people to see it through their perspective
Hmm.
is really, really empowering in a way. But then also having the language, what are
Hmm.
the key words of
Yeah.
how to talk into the listening of someone who lives in a different country than you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there, as you say that, I think there's probably certain words that are going to trigger people, right? Um, and I don't know what they are necessarily, but I know I have them, even though I'm not sure I know what they are. I just know when I hear certain things, like I'm immediately in defensive mode, right?
Right.
Because my country has been invaded. I feel that. So to know that is one thing, but to know then what to do with that, and then to have language like, you know, if I'm trying to articulate, for me, when I hear a word like this, I struggle with that. And so what are you trying to communicate there? And maybe there's a better way. Is that part of the work that you do through this tool?
Yes, absolutely. There's a whole learning portal that organizations can have all their employees plug into. So everyone takes their Dignify snapshot. It's
Mm-hmm.
visible to everyone in the organization. It's meant to be transparent
Mm-hmm.
so that individuals, whether it be employee to employee or employee to manager, can
Mm-hmm.
have check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
And those 15 to 30-minute conversations are, TJ, tell me about your number one dignity trait and why that's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it
Mm-hmm.
just creates a safe space for people to sit and listen to each other about what matters. What are their drivers? And
Yeah.
as you do that, people start to see each other and the miscommunications go down and
Mm-hmm.
the understanding goes up, which
Mm-hmm.
improves productivity and improves collaboration. There's a ton of learning videos in there and it's gamified so people can do it on a regular basis to
Mm-hmm.
keep learning new things. There's surveys and meetings and different ways to utilize it so it's woven into the day-to-day fabric of an organization. It's not just a take this thing and then we're done. It's
Yeah.
not that at all. It's
That's
really,
important.
I've never found anything like it at all. And I've been doing this stuff for nearly 24 years. So
Yeah, I think that last piece of it's not just to take the thing and then hopefully you retain it enough to be able to like figure out how to make it work. I've never believed in that because I just don't think we're wired that way. Like
no.
we have like you're talking about these deeply, the deep wiring we have in our system, and something might like vibrate it a little bit, like maybe that's not a great thing, but it's strong and it's gonna like reform and so having part of what I like about coaching in general is that process can help you continue to activate it. But this sounds really interesting that it's built into its approach to recognize that in our human nature and then give us ways to effectively rewire by the behaviors we take, because knowing a thing is okay, but doing a
knowing
thing
and doing are two very, very different things.
Yeah, and
right?
doing repeatedly and like really rewiring and creating new habits and all that.
Yeah. I mean, so for example, I have a team that I worked with in May, and while they have done the one-to-one check-ins, they also do it as a team. They're a small team,
cool.
right? And so every week at their team meetings, one person is the question asker and one person is the answer person, right?
Okay.
About their top 5 dignity traits. And everybody else is on the Zoom call and they get to listen in. It's not about putting somebody in the hot seat. It's not that at all. It's like, it's more of, tell me who you are. So I can understand you better. I can relate to you better. And we can dial down the misunderstandings because we see things very differently. We come from different countries. And as they've done that, that has really created a level playing field for them.
Wow. That question, tell me who you are. Again, I just think we decide who people are instead of asking who they are, right? We show up to, particularly at work. It probably happens in all areas of our life, but like,
oh yeah, my, he had a blue shirt on. Do you know about people who wear blue shirts?
People, right?
God.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Or he likes cats. Like, what does that mean? And then I make a whole story about it, and then it's so funny because it's like, a lot of the sort of office gossip is often just that. He's like this. He's like that. That team is like that. Not based on anybody actually talking to them about like, who are you? What do you need?
All assumptions, interpretations versus, did anybody bother to ask him about that?
Right.
No, I wasn't going to ask him. Did you ask him? No, I didn't ask him. I didn't know, right? Our brains want to fill in the blanks. And so we make assumptions to fill in the blanks to satisfy our ego. And then, so I learned a long time ago to stop making assumptions and just ask.
Yeah, I think it's very wise. And I think one of the things that coaching can do is create the safety for those conversations and help people recognize the importance of them and give them space to do it in a way where, the judgment for telling me, if you tell me who you are, like it's done in a way where I'm not feeling as vulnerable, because I think that's a lot of what might come up. If I don't want anybody to know who I am. I don't even like who I am because I have all these judgments from when I was 6 or 7 years old. Right.
So and so you see how that stacking starts to happen. If you don't, if someone doesn't have self-love or self-respect, They're
Mm-hmm.
going to do this, right? They're going to hide out
Mm-hmm.
because then they might be found out. Well, I don't have all the answers. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know this, that, or the other. I mean, that's who I was
Yeah.
20 something years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know all the answers. And I thought that I had to have all the answers. So I was like, I was so armored up. I literally, when I lived in Atlanta, I was working for US Web,
Mm-hmm.
and I would drive to work every day, my little green turbo bug, and I
Mm-hmm.
would listen to the Matrix soundtrack. Like,
Mm.
and that's not typically the kind of, I'm more of like an Indigo Girls kind of person,
Yeah.
right? But it was this way for me to armor up to
Mm-hmm.
go compete in the boys club
Mm-hmm.
back then,
Yeah.
right? And it was really detrimental, I found
Yeah.
out later.
Mm. Well, yeah, right. That was just another layer to the shell you were building instead of, feeling safe enough to actually go like, this is who I am. So for me to
Yeah,
contribute to this team, this is what I need.
right.
And by the way, I'd love to know what you need so that I can contribute, in a way that works for you as well. And, I come back to it's such a simple concept, but yet we resist it like with
The
everything we
plague.
have. Like
Right,
it's,
because no one likes to feel vulnerable.
yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
as Brene Brown is so often quoting, vulnerability is actually our superpower.
Yeah,
I
I agree.
had when
Mm-hmm.
I was in one of my very first coach training classes, TJ. It was a corporate coaching course, and
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to have had all 5 of my CTI training courses under my belt, and I had one, but I'm like, I'll just figure it out because that's who I am, right?
Yeah.
And I sneak in, and we're having these conversations, and I'll never forget this. John Vercelli, who was a trainer at CTI and it was part of this company, and he
Mm-hmm.
looked at me. He's very tall. He's like 6'6" or something. He's like,
Wow.
you know, you're much more approachable when you're vulnerable. And I was like,
Mm.
no, thank you. Like, are you smoking crack?
Yeah,
No.
I don't
And
like any of that. Yeah.
it's taken me years and reminder after reminder after reminder to go, no, we're all just human. And when you just put yourself out there, like, this
Mm-hmm.
is me and these are the bumps and the foibles that I've gone through, it's okay. And so it, it's interesting as it comes full circle because, you know, as I mentioned, I just published a new book that I co-authored
Mm-hmm.
with Tom Collins called I Am Perfectly Flawsome,
I
how
love that.
embracing our imperfections makes us better.
Mm-hmm.
And on the cover is a kintsugi bowl. And I
Mm.
don't know if you know what kintsugi is. It's the
I've
Japanese
heard of it.
art
Yeah.
and philosophy of mending ceramic pottery,
Mm-hmm.
putting them back together, and then painting over those wounds with gold dust.
Mm.
So the broken, repaired bowl is more valuable and more beautiful than the original,
Mm. That's
right?
that's powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting concept. Like the idea of embracing our imperfections, right? You've talked about perfectionism and I'd love to dive into that more broadly through the lens of this book. But I think when I hear something like embrace your imperfections, it sounds like, sure, I should do that, but I have no idea how to do that. Like my brain just doesn't like, it just keeps stopping. Like, well, why would I embrace a thing that's bad? So, and I know like language is probably not what I should be using, but that's where the brain seems to want to go is like, that's a flaw. So why would I? So what does embracing an imperfection look
Exactly. I mean, we've been programmed through the millennia. Flaws are bad. Perfection is the ideal. And
like?
if you can't reach it, then I've had clients tell me, well, if it's not perfect, then don't even bother to start. That was their
Mm-hmm.
belief, right?
Yeah.
And so embracing your imperfection means it doesn't mean going from I have to have everything perfect to being mediocre,
Right.
but it's about dialing down the toxic perfectionism, which drives our cortisol levels up, our adrenal glands go into hyperdrive. It stresses
Mm.
us out,
Yeah.
and taking it down to a place of striving for excellence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do my very best that I know how to do today with the knowledge that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Now that might change tomorrow. I can learn something new and then I can do even better.
Yeah.
But realizing that 90 to 95% of the goal is probably pretty close to perfect. And if that last 5% is going to cost you, detrimentally to your health and well-being, then is it really worth it?
Yeah.
Right. So recognizing those places where we're over pushing ourselves, we're over engaging, we're people pleasing, we're striving above and beyond, or worse, we're not even getting started because we can't quite get it perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that, because I think, when you mention the word perfectionism, and I think into the world of advertising and creativity, what you notice a lot in that space is kind of what you're talking about. Meaning, one of the frustrations you'll often have with somebody who's very creative is they'll do something, and then somebody along the way, whether it's in their team or on the client side, doesn't want to do it. It feels too risky, too scary.
Right.
And to me, in some ways, that feels rooted in sort of a perfectionism that just like keeps us down. Because if I have to be perfect, of course I'm not going to try that thing. Like, because there's a chance it won't work, right? Versus if I just do the safest thing I know of possible that always quote unquote works, I'm good. I'm still perfect. So
right. And so our ego remains intact.
yeah.
And so I think that's where the challenge comes in, is that as creatives, right, there's this overwhelming sense of it has to be better, faster, more creative, more fancy, more bells and whistles than the next guy, or else you're going to get pushed out.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very cutthroat industry. And so I'm sure to all the creatives who are listening, they're thinking, well, of course it has to be perfect. Why would I embrace my flaws? Right.
Yeah.
But it is the learning that comes from the times that we do fall down and we miss the mark, that then we become even better. Right.
Yeah.
Nothing is perfect. It is merely an illusion that we have created in our minds to satisfy our egos. Right. If you look in nature, is anything perfect?
Yeah.
It's all
it's like not all symmetrical. It's not all yeah, things have flaws in them. And I think even, when you think about great art, like, great art is not presenting a perfect sort of utopian view of something. Great art is usually bringing some flaw, some dark shadow side of the world or humanity to the surface. And that's what makes it sort of beautiful and powerful. It's not that, in the world of AI, like, you could get something that creates a perfect image of somebody, but it feels empty.
Right. Or it has an extra finger to it. Right.
Well, yeah, there's that.
AI does that.
But I think like the best creative work, like, it's showing us our flaws. It in many ways celebrates, think about the greatest TV shows, things like The Wire and the Sopranos and Breaking Bad, like those shows were not coming close to showing an idealized version of the world, but we connected to them because it exposed those flaws in humanity in obviously a very big way. But we need to see them so that we can see them in ourselves, and then not want to eliminate them, but go what can I learn from them, so that next time I try something a little different. Yeah, exactly.
It's all a learning process. I always like to say there's no such thing as perfectionism. There's only learning, growing, and improving. Right? Because it's a never-ending process.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. No, go ahead.
And I was to say, but it's those flaws that help us learn and grow and improve.
Yeah.
And the stumbles and the foibles and where we fall down completely on our face. But it's the universe's way. In my experience, I found that it's the universe's way of going, no, not that.
Yeah.
look over here,
Yeah.
try something different.
Yeah. And I think like that to me starts to connect back to those Japanese bowls, right? It's like we are continually evolving and becoming better versions of ourselves, the more of those scars that show up. So the best version of ourselves is the most scarred, made the most mistakes. Each one is moving us forward. So it's such a good metaphor. I find it's really hard in the moment to access that. Like
Yes.
what can help us see that as close to in the moment as possible, so we're not sort of dwelling on that latest flaw or failure for too long.
Sure. So recognizing where you fall down,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh, I was talking with someone yesterday and she's like, yeah, I like to call when I make a mistake. Oh, that was sexy. I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Like, okay, that was sexy.
Yeah.
And then, like, okay, well, what can I learn from it?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I apply that moving forward? But even in the very, very moment of it, it's just pausing and breathing,
Mm-hmm.
taking a few deep breaths. And instead of perhaps going to that knee jerk reaction of, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. You're such a blah, 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 blah,
Mm-hmm.
right? And go,
Yeah.
okay, that happened.
Yeah.
And how do we do it differently so that doesn't happen again?
Yeah. I feel like the simple advice of taking a breath is just like an immediate fast forward button on our ability to like live better, right? Because there's so
Yeah.
many things where if we just take a breath, whether it's our own stuff where we're quote unquote failing, or somebody triggers us in some way, and if we can just take a breath and go, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? And what can I do with this
Yes.
information? Um, like I feel like just if we just gave the world that, like we'd already be on a path
Yeah.
towards all the things we're talking about. One of the things that shows up as we are talking about this, though, there's sort of the individual way of dealing with this, and the tools and some of the work you do to help people kind of move through this perfectionism through the coaching and the hypnosis. Like, but then I think about like you're working in a team or in a company, and the cultural stuff that seems to encourage the perfectionist mindset, seems to reward that even. How do you start to break that down when it's now a communal thing versus an individual thing?
Sure. Well, that's where the group work is so powerful because
Mm-hmm.
as a team, we can have that conversation and go, well, what really is perfection? I mean, there are cases where perfectionism is really important, like building airplanes
Yeah.
or the Titan sub.
Mm-hmm.
There are some examples of where things went really bad because it
Yeah.
wasn't actually perfect,
Mm-hmm.
right? But in the grand scheme of things,
Mm-hmm.
what is really perfection? And so having a conversation around that, like, well, what does that mean to you versus what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean to me? So
Yeah.
resetting, finding the level playing ground of what is the actual expectation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And how is that enhancing the culture or being detrimental to the culture?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have that conversation set against the backdrop of, well, what are our team goals and values or organizational goals and values?
Mm-hmm.
Did those align or
Yeah.
are they out of alignment with each other? So
Mm-hmm.
it's finding those deeper meaning and alignments between where are we going and what are we really trying to achieve
Mm-hmm.
from the macro down to the micro, and how is
Yeah.
that being implemented in different ways?
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it comes back to like those conversations aren't quote unquote difficult, meaning that feels like a good, nice, natural conversation to have. But for some reason, we resist having them to maybe be standing face to face with the challenges that we have or the changes we need to make. And then I also thought, as you mentioned the Boeing example or the Titan sub example, as you talk about going from the macro to the micro, it's almost like what I wonder is at a macro level, the bolt needs to fit perfectly, whatever the thing is, right? But at a micro level, where is there room for me to have some missteps along the way towards that journey so that we get there because we've created a culture and a process that ensures we get there, and nothing ships until it's there. But if I have a bad normal human day where I don't do project X perfectly, how do you embrace it in the same way of like, well, good. Now that we know that wasn't the right thing to do, we can fix it. Like, rather than the pressure, because you talk about the cortisol and the adrenal glands, I think the pressure of pointing towards perfection, whether it's literal perfection or some ideal of it as the best creative ad or the best whatever, you can have that excellence demanded, but still have room for people to be human as we work there. And I like that sort of macro micro delineation. It seems like it leaves room for that. Do you find that when you're working with teams that they can create the space for people to still show up as human beings while aiming for that excellent outcome?
Yes, well, and that's one of the things I love about the Dignified tool is because it helps us to see each other for who we authentically are. What are our natural strengths? And getting everybody to operate from their natural strengths. So, for example, if you've got someone, at a very basic example, if you've got someone who's a real introvert, you don't want to put them at the front desk greeting people.
Yeah.
That will feel like, trying to pull their fingernails out, right? Yep. Or trying to put a creative in the back room all by themselves. They get, right? Yeah. So you have to find the place of flow for people to operate from so that your collaboration expands and your productivity expands and you get everybody rowing in the right direction towards the same goals. But if you're not clear on what those expectations are or what the goals are, they haven't trickled down from the C-suite all the way down, then everybody feels like worker bees and I'm just, I'm a cog in the machine. Several years ago, a friend of mine was a operations director at Amazon. And, they have a really high bar there, but their burnout rate and their turnover rate was really, really high. Right. And so you have to, as a company, depending on what you're doing, you have to determine what's more important, keeping the people that I've already spent time and effort and money to train by not burning them out, or I don't care and I'm just going to keep replacing them. Right. And some industries are like that.
Yeah. I mean, advertising can be like that. And that's, I think, a point of frustration, a point of even maybe leading to some of the kind of mental health stuff you're talking about, the high anxiety that can then manifest in all the physical symptoms or depression that has its own manifestations. The advertising, I think I've heard the stat at roughly a third of an agency turns over every year. So that's
wow, that's really
lot.
high turnover.
I think standard is like 10 to 15% maybe in most industries. So, but I think there's a little bit of that decision making going on, like, well, I can just replace people, which then takes me back to the whole question of dignity, because hard to feel like you have your dignity when you're stepping into a place that believes you are just completely replaceable, right? So if you were meeting with somebody from one of these businesses, because there's probably a bunch that are playing in that space of a third or more turnover. And let's just say they had made a decision at some point to just accept that, because that's a lot of what you see. But they also don't like some of the manifestations that come from that. They see the mental health issues. They see something, they go, it's not great. Their reputation is maybe starting to take a nosedive because we now have things like Glassdoor and other things where you get all the bad reviews. How might you help them see a different path versus the one that said, burnout's fine, I can replace people? Like, is that possible to get people to embrace a new mindset?
It can be. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on what the top of the food chain wants.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't get agreement from the C-suite,
Yeah.
then it's going to be very difficult for it to filter down into the rest of the organization. But if that desire is there,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you can start with, well, let's just break it down. What is it actually costing you?
Yeah.
And time, effort, and money,
Mm-hmm.
but also what's it costing mental health and well-being of your employees who are staying,
Right.
and their extra workload every time somebody goes out, then you have to find somebody and you have to bring them in, you have to train them. And
Yeah.
there's all of that extra stress that gets put on and redistributed across everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you can break it down into those hard numbers and then go, well, if there's a better way to operate, would you be interested?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It helps them maybe see a different possible story for their company, right? Because the story currently is, this is the only way I know how to do it. This is the only way we seem to get the work where I
This
feel
is
like
the way it's always been done. Well,
yeah.
but it doesn't always have to be that way, right?
Yeah.
I was on a conversation earlier talking about how the workforce is really changing as the
Mm-hmm.
millennials come up into leadership positions.
Yeah.
And so the old guard, the boomers are,
Mm-hmm.
they're starting to retire, or they are
Yeah.
retiring by 10,000 a day or something. It's kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So as a leadership team, really thinking about what kind of organization do you want to have? What's the culture that you
Mm-hmm.
want to have that's going to have people go, oh my gosh, this is the best place I've ever worked and I don't ever want to leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a great way of looking at it. And then it brings up a thought that we sometimes, if you're not in the C-suite, you sometimes think, well, they must love the way things are working because it's how it's working. But I think when you actually talk to folks in the C-suite, sometimes it's actually like, I hate this. I'm miserable. I have anxiety through the roof. My marriage just failed. My kids don't want to talk to me, but I don't know how else to do this. And I don't want to lose this thing, this position,
Right.
the money, the esteem. So they feel trapped in many ways.
Right.
So to potentially show them that there's possibly a different way where you don't have to live like that to have what you want, can be eye-opening for a lot of leaders who think this is just the way it's always been done, like you said. So I guess I just have to be miserable to have, quote unquote, what I want, which is kind of a weird way of
Right. And that's why oftentimes the work I do in teams starts because the leader of the organization comes to me like, I need to do something different in my life. I don't know what that looks like or how to do it or even how to even think about doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring in the Dignify tool just as a one-to-one option tool, right? In addition to the coaching and the hypnotherapy to start lowering their stress levels, et cetera. And as we have these conversations, they start to see how validating this information is, but to see how validating it can be for their team. So I had a manager come work, or not work for me, to come work with me because her boss sought me out and said she needs help. It was like just shy of a PIP, right?
Okay.
There was some bad behavior that happened. Trust was broken, and this was more than coaching could handle.
Right.
And so I worked with her, and in the process of doing that, I had her and her boss, who was the VP, both take the Dignify snapshot. And I kind of mediated a conversation between the two of them using their Dignify snapshots as a way of understanding each other.
Right.
And you could see the light bulbs going off like, oh, that's why she's acting this way and she's acting this way. And so it created so much more understanding. It dialed down the grit that was in the mill, and this trust level started to be rebuilt. And then they invited me to come in to work with their whole team.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So it plays out that way. So then it starts to create this ripple effect.
Yeah. And I can see that. I mean, my own experiences with getting information through some kind of tool or assessment, like you have it, like you've always got whenever you're working, there's always somebody who you just don't quite get, for whatever reason. And then you see why, and then you do have that aha moment. Oh, so if I just approach them this way, that would actually help connect to what they need. Oh, okay. Remarkably simple. And now of course I have to do it and I have to keep doing it.
Right.
But I love how that then expands into, well, let's try that for the company. Because then I think, okay, these cultural shifts that we're talking about, that's how they can happen. It's like maybe you start with one person or two people or three people trying to figure out some smaller problem, but expand it throughout the whole organization. And now you have the understanding and the language to work together in a way that actually works. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a huge, huge difference. And it's a way of starting to connect the dots between the employees, not necessarily in a touchy-feely way, but it just creates that deeper level of understanding of, oh, I can see you now for who you are.
Yeah.
What makes you awesome versus who I thought you were based on your title.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how we love to take all those mental shortcuts to make a quick assessment of somebody. And it's also amazing how relatively not difficult it is to lose that and go through what you're talking about and get I think we have probably a story in our head that to really know this person would be just a lot of work. And I don't know if I have time for that. So
well, that feels weird and uncomfortable.
It does feel like you said, a little touchy-feely and this is work. We don't do those things at work. So I love how you make it both deep and meaningful, but also practical and accessible. And I think that's really important, particularly in a work or corporate space, because people aren't always open to the let's just get all.
It's not a kumbaya kind of thing. I mean, I love it. They relaunched the platform earlier this year, and they now have an app that goes with it as well. And because everyone's snapshots are visible to each other, right? At any given moment, say we're working on a project together, we just completed it. I can go into the Dignify portal and dignify you, TJ. I can go, based on this project we worked on, TJ, it was so great to see how you were really standing in your dignity trait of creative while also honoring the organizational value of, innovation. And I just so really appreciate that about you. And so then everybody can see it. You get a little email in your email box that says, you've been dignified. Yeah. And it's a little happy chemical boost, a little dopamine, serotonin rush that happens. You're like, oh, that feels nice, right?
It does.
And we all just want to feel good.
Of course. And I think the fact that it's connecting to who you truly are is what makes it meaningful versus sometimes, I've worked with clients where the sort of more generic kudos just doesn't land, yay, you all did great.
Attaboy, nice job, pat on the back.
It's not terrible, but it ends up feeling a little empty. And so connecting it back to this is who you are, and I see that and I value that. That's hard not to hit.
Absolutely. I mean, over the years, I've done so many different leadership trainings. And one of my favorite things to end the day with is this acknowledgement exercise. And essentially what they've done is they've taken it and they've turned it into an app, right? And it's we would we'd have small groups of people, 4 people in a group. And one person would be in the hot seat and everybody else would go, this is what I've seen about you today that I appreciate. Right? And somebody would be writing it down so that at the end of the conversation, everybody had a piece of paper with these acknowledgments of their behavior and who they were seen to be. And every time somebody's in tears, because I never knew you thought that about me. Or I've never been acknowledged in that way. And it moves people because it touches their heart, not just their head, right?
Yeah, I think we treat the heart like it has an electric fence around it at work sometimes, and it's just like a no-go zone, right? It's I don't want to get into that, but it is so powerful. The simplest of recognition at work, I know just personally, like it stays with you for days or weeks sometimes, because like I still remember certain things people said to me 10, 15, 20 years ago, because it was genuine and not necessarily something I had heard often. So
Yeah.
I can see how that could be really valuable. Um, we're talking a lot about the coaching process and the work you do, and the value of it. And it brings me to a question. So I think I mentioned, I always like to get one person to ask a question for the next person who's going to be on the show. So the person who was on before was George Tannenbaum, and he's been a creative director, executive creative director for years in the advertising space. And he has been somewhat taken aback by the abundance of coaches in the world that seem to have emerged, particularly as LinkedIn has become more present. So
Right.
his
Everybody's a
question,
coach now.
yeah, and like, and he said this, and not in a like in a mean way, but more like a curiosity way. Like, so coaching in his mind feels pretty new, and it's not that new because my dad's been doing it for almost 30 years, and you've been doing it for 20, almost four. Like, but this idea of what is coaching ultimately adding, that like what was there before coaching kind of really showed up and made like, and how did people try to deal with some of this stuff, and how does coaching maybe help us deal with those things a little bit better? I think that's kind of the gist of the question.
Sure. So I think prior to the birth of the coaching industry, and
Mhm.
say somewhere between maybe 1995 and 2000,
Yeah, that feels
let's
right. Yeah.
say somewhere in there, we didn't talk about emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, buck up, do your
Yeah.
best, boys don't cry.
Yes.
And, girls are secretaries. And,
Mm-hmm.
it was a very different world.
Yeah.
I mean, if you roll that back, the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, it was just
Mm-hmm.
a very
Yeah.
different mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very power and control kind
Mm-hmm.
of operations in corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
And things slowly have started to shift, and we've begun to recognize we don't just operate from our head up. We
Mm-hmm.
have to bring our whole self to work, because if our body's not working, it's going to be hard for our head to work effectively, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
muscle through it. No, it just doesn't work that way. And so
Yeah.
I think that's why it's become so powerful, because it has given us permission to feel seen and heard,
Mm-hmm.
whereas I don't think we were before. Maybe not even, maybe in personal relationships, maybe, but
Maybe.
maybe
Yeah.
not,
Mm-hmm.
in brief moments. But also, it's given space for people to speak their feelings
Mm-hmm.
and to speak their truth
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's more constructive, that
Mm-hmm.
is started to level the playing field, which is why I think we have such a different set of perspectives from boomers and how leadership is supposed to look, and
Yeah.
millennials and how leadership is supposed to look. There's a
Mm-hmm.
big chasm there because
Mm-hmm.
of the history,
Yeah.
and how things have changed. So it's about really recognizing that we now bring our whole self to work,
Yeah.
and we've started to make that okay.
Yeah, which I'm grateful for, I think, Gen Xers, so sitting in between those generations, I can see both sides, and I think that's okay. But I think the notion of being able to, one of the reasons I went into advertising was because I wanted to be myself, and it was the closest space for that. It allowed me to
Yeah.
be a little bit more silly and goofy, to wear cat t-shirts once in a while, to like not be sort of stuffy corporate, because that was just never me. And so to me, the fact that that idea is now expanding to try to include every workspace, and I know there's clearly a lot of work to be done, but I do see that as a big value of coaching, executive coaching, leadership coaching, career coaching, all of it, to help people see that, yeah, not only like do we want that because it feels good for all of us, but like if we want better work, that's how you get better work. People to show up with all of their stuff, and they get to like
Right.
bring all of the good stuff, and have ways of expressing it, and have language to express it, and have cultures that allow for like, oh, I didn't know that about you. That might actually be really useful on this project. Whereas if we had to just kind of quote unquote stay in our lane and head down to your job, you would never know those things, So
Exactly. Exactly. It's
Yeah.
really about tapping, as you said, it's tapping into all of the experience of someone, right?
Yeah.
Because you never know when those little nuggets of wisdom that we picked up in different, very different aspects of our lives come into play. And that creates that light bulb moment, especially in the advertising industry, where folks want that edge of, well, how do we say that differently? How do we articulate that value proposition in a way that no one's ever seen it or heard of it before, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that ultimately, helps everyone. And I think it also kind of coming back to what you were talking about earlier, and I think we had talked about before the show a little bit, but just this idea of having everybody feel like they belong and they're welcome and they're included and all those things that I know we're working through sort of broadly as a culture. That's how you start to get there, when you allow people to truly show up and be themselves. And the benefit is, you want more creativity? Let that person be who they are, because I guarantee they have something that we would have never thought of if they thought they had to hide that part of who they are,
Yeah. I mean, I was having a coaching session yesterday with a client, and, she was like, I feel so stuck inside this box. And when we broke it down, it was because her mom told her that was what was required. Her siblings were trying to control her, that kept her inside of this box, when she knew inherently within herself, I don't belong in that box. I don't want, she's like, I'm a black sheep. I don't want to be in the box. I'm like, good for you.
Yeah.
Black sheep just means you've got a broader purview of the world and what's possible there. And others can't see that. So they try to bring you down. It's human nature, TJ, and you probably know this from your work as a coach. But if I can't be comfortable within myself, if I'm unhappy within myself, and you're over there being all smiley face, I'm going to try and pull you down into my lower negative energy field, because that makes me, your smiley face makes me too uncomfortable. So if I can knock you down emotionally, physically, energetically, to level the playing field so I feel better, well, then that's a good day, right?
Yeah.
But in understanding that now, it's like, no, I'm going to stay up here in my happy place. If you want to come up here, great.
Let's go.
The air's nice. Join me. But if you don't know, I'm not taking that gift of negativity that you're trying to hand and pawn off on me, because that is not my stuff.
Yeah, no, and I think that's awesome. And I think we need more of that. I think that is what coaching can help with, is to change the conversation to, let's stop trying to level the playing field by pulling people down, and let's try to do it by lifting people up, and making that the cultural expectation within any organization. This is what we do here. We don't do that,
Yeah.
And then, that becomes a gift to the person who was pulling you down, because maybe they finally start to see, like, oh, there's another way for me to feel good and to not feel attacked. I can actually feel that way if I, bring myself up. So there's so much value to that isn't always we're not always aware of. I think we're just aware of the surface level tensions and problems, but we're not aware that there's a solution that doesn't involve doing things the same way we've always done them.
Yeah. I think we, as coaches, we kind of live, eat, breathe this stuff. How do we work better, smarter, faster, lighter, more joyfully? Whereas everybody else is like heads down doing their thing. And of course, there are exceptions to that, right? I'm being very broad in general, but
it's true. I mean, I've been there in my life where I was definitely just, the thing in front of me was the only thing. And I didn't really have the space or the awareness to go up further. So I think coaching definitely helps with that. I would love to give you a chance to ask our next guest a question. So our next guest is a guy named Chris McMahon, and he's an ad agency creative director as well. And he's got a really interesting perspective on the business, but basically he's, his tagline, if you will, is passion is sexy. That's kind of his whole line for the way he likes to talk about the work he does. Does anything come up for you as a question that I could ask him?
Sure. So one of the things that I've learned through my work, TJ, is that our greatest source of pain is often our greatest source of passion and
Mm,
purpose.
mm,
So my question for Chris is, what was his greatest source of pain
mm.
that led him to his work so passionately?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. I will definitely ask that, and I am very curious what his answer will be. But
Me
yeah, that's a
too.
really interesting insight, and it feels right to me, like that we go to the good place motivated sometimes by something that really stuck with us. So thank you for that question. I will I'll look forward to the answer, and I'll let you know what it is as well.
Yes, I'll be very curious to know myself.
Awesome. Well, one of the other questions I always like to ask people towards the end of the episode is, you know, work world's pretty disrupted right now. People are feeling a lot of pain. You talked about some clients with the anxiety and other clients who are dealing with that toxic perfectionism and et cetera, et cetera. So if you could wave a magic wand and create sort of a fully desuckified, there we
This is
go.
my magic wand that it looks like a pen.
Uh-huh.
It's actually a magic wand.
I love that. So what
Yes.
does it do when you wave it, and how does it create something that is more desuckified in the work world for us?
Well, it's about creating that greater place of awareness,
Mm-hmm.
of pausing and recognizing the sensations.
Mm-hmm.
What am I feeling? What's the looping negative thoughts perhaps in my mind that are keeping me stuck in that place of pain,
Mm-hmm.
keeping it stuck in my nervous system? And how do I step out of that?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can be easy. Sometimes it can be more difficult.
Yeah.
But when we make the intentional effort to do that,
Mm-hmm.
it can be life changing.
Yeah. I love that. I think life changing sounds good to me, and I think that's how, like, the more people do that kind of intentional behavior, the more you see these shifts, the more we get closer to this world of work and beyond work where things don't have to be so hard and difficult.
Yeah.
So I think that sounds amazing. Speaking of sounds, another thing I like to ask people before we say goodbye is, I use a lot of sound effects in the show. I'm the cat guy, so I've got a lot of cat sounds. But everybody, pretty much so far, has also contributed their own sound. So, is there a sound you would like to add to our desuckified sound library?
Yes. I thought about this very intently yesterday when you asked me the question. So here's my best desuckify sound. Ready?
Yep.
See, now it's the pressure's on. I don't know if I can do it. Ready? Um,
Sure. Can you do that one more time just so I can catch it?
okay, ready?
It's interesting. It's not coming through great, but I think I got it. It's the compression of the Zoom, I think. But it sounded like you were kind of doing that, like inhaling, but like kind of sound, like scooping something into your mouth,
It's
almost kind of.
like a slurping
Yeah,
sound.
yeah, yeah. And
You
what
know
is?
how you suck up a spaghetti noodle?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll laugh at this. So, in my first graphic design class at the University of Florida,
Mm-hmm.
we had to create an ad, and mine was a visual of a plate of spaghetti, and I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to figure out how to spell the sound that you make when you. I'm like, how do you spell that? I don't know. So that's the same problem here. Like, how do you
Yeah.
make the sound of sucking up spaghetti? And you know,
Mm-hmm.
so
So
I'll.
the fun sound. Is there any significance to it in terms of like what it means or anything?
That's an excellent question.
It doesn't
I
have to be. It can just be a fun
I don't
sound.
think so. It's
Yeah.
like, well, okay. Think of it this way. You know how you've got something. This is the first visual that comes to mind. So you've got something embedded in a piece of Jello,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to pull it out. And there's that suction, and then
Yeah.
pop it, you pop it out, right?
Yeah.
Well, we can take that same sound that you're imagining in your head right now
Mm-hmm.
and think of it as the same sound that happens when you're pulling out those negative energy cords that have had you attached to all that negative junk in your trunk all these years, and you pull it out and it's gone and you're done. You're like, oh, that feels so much better now. Thank you.
I love that. I think that summarizes it perfectly. And that feels, there's such relief in that, and I think that's a lot of what you're offering people is a sense of relief of not being attached to those things that are causing both the sort of mental, the emotional, and the physical stuff that's holding us back. So if people want to experience some of that, how do they get in touch with you? How do they find you online? What's the best way for them to track you down?
Sure. So you can always go to michelemolitor.com. That's Michele with one L. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook. I have a Rewire for Success group. You can find me on Instagram at Rewire, Rapid Rewire. And I'm always happy to have a complimentary and confidential conversation, TJ, with anybody who's curious about this work and how it can be of help to them. And on my website, you'll find a lot of free resources and articles. I'm always writing, and I got my new book, How I Am Perfectly Flawsome, and then the companion journal that goes with it, the I'm Perfectly Flawsome journal as well, so you can get out of your own perfectionistic ways. But I'm happy to help anybody who's tuned in on how to live their best life.
I love that. I think the book is awesome, and I think the way you work is really interesting. So I hope people check it out, because I think that combination that you're doing, the kind of the internal and kind of the head work, and then the hypnosis to kind of get some of those deeper things to the surface, it's a really interesting combination that I think it has a lot of power. And who wouldn't want something to go faster? Who wouldn't want to get to that better place faster? So I hope people check it out, read the book, reach out, create a conversation with you. And I just want to say thank you, Michele, for coming on and being such an amazing guest. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, TJ. It's really been a joy having this conversation with you, and vibing with another creative. It's nice. Yeah. It's really, really nice.
I love that. Thank you. It was really fun. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Michele for bringing compassion, insight, and hope to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider officially changing your name to Count to Suck and joining me as co-host on this show every week. You can follow Michele on LinkedIn and check out her site at michelemolitor.com for free resources, articles, and a link to her book, I Am Perfectly Flawsome, How Embracing Imperfection Makes Us Better. Speaking of imperfection, you should check out my site and my Substack newsletter. They are loaded with flawed attempts at insight and inspiration. If you'd like to get a taste of that face-to-face, let's set up a free half-hour strategy session. Bye, everyone.